listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. To hear the full show each day, tune in to AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN or log in to accesswdun.com and click the Listen Live button from 9 to 11, Monday through Friday. It is the Martha Zoller Show, and this was one of the most shocking stories that I think we've seen in a long time, and it was because of the age of the child. It appears that this was the largest group of unaccompanied minors that came into the United States. It was a group of 60 or 80 of all different ages, but one of the people were 2 years old and had a little note in her hand. And I mean, I don't know about you. I got really smart grandkids, but I don't think at 2 years old they could have traveled by themselves. And it's a pretty shocking story. So Jorge Ventura is joining me right now. He's with NewsNation. And I tell you, if you haven't found NewsNation, you need to do it because they not only cover the news in a fair way, they don't do a story one day and then never go back again. And that's one of the things I love about them. Jorge Ventura, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. So I think that I have been following this story of these unaccompanied children for over a year now, and I'm calling it 21st century slavery because there's no way to really know if these kids are ending up with their family members or someone else, and it's just a horrible stain on this country that we have so many unaccompanied minors that have come through the border and we don't really know where they are now. But it sort of was encapsulated by this video that went viral of this little 2-year-old child that had a little sticky note and was unaccompanied. Tell us about this story and tell us what you're doing right now.
Yeah, so we're here in Maverick County in Eagle Pass, Texas. It's an area that is, heavily mortified by Texas DPS and Texas National Guard. And while crossings are down here, they're starting to see these kind of large groups of migrants start to arrive. They're being guided by criminal smugglers on the Mexican side. But what's more shocking for Texas authorities here is that just the amount of unaccompanied minors is staggering. We're talking about in that one video with the 2-year-old toddler, Texas officials actually encountered a group of over 200 migrants, but in that group were 60 unaccompanied minors. Texas officials told me that's the most unaccompanied minors that they ever encountered in a single group. And obviously you saw that heartbreaking scene with a toddler just 2 years old traveling all alone. She said her parents were in the United States. She had a little note with a phone number and a name that says Mama Patty. I actually will be following up with that phone number. And earlier this morning, once again, Texas officials encountered another group of 200 migrants, and in that group were 50 unaccompanied minors, which it's just heartbreaking because those unaccompanied minors are likely in the hands of cartels, criminal smugglers. It's hard to tell if they've been abused. And for Texas state troopers, their conversations with these children are very brief because at the end of the day, it's a federal immigration issue. So what Texas officials tell me is they'll, when they meet these unaccompanied minors, they're going to try to get as much information out of them, see if there's any signs of abuse. But after that, they have to be turned over to Border Patrol officials, and there's really no way to really verify if that contact, on their note is actually their parent or not. So it's an extremely worrying situation, especially here in Maverick County, because to cross into Maverick County, those kids have to go through the Rio Grande, which it's a really dangerous river. I've seen families been swept all the time. And criminal smugglers, at the end of the day, they don't really care for these children. They just want to make their money. So here in Maverick County, a huge uptick in those unaccompanied minors, and those numbers have been very staggering in the last recent weeks.
I mean, and it's a product to them. It's a product to the cartels. This isn't a human being. And I don't know if there's sex trafficking or labor trafficking, but we know there's human trafficking going on, regardless of what it is. And I just don't understand why these numbers have been large now for 2.5 years. I mean, at the end of the Trump administration, they had gotten the number down pretty low. And the big problem they had was they couldn't find family members of the kids that they had left that they had to match up to a family member. And now it seems like our government is just matching these kids up with anybody who says they're a relative. And that is very scary to me, Jorge.
That's exactly right. And the thing is with Border Patrol is once those unaccompanied minors are under their custody, they turn them over to the Department of Health and Human Services. But the Department of Health and Human Services doesn't have the proper staff right now to actually go through a proper vetting process. So these children, they're being released to sponsors, and there's really, like I said, no way to really verify if that's their parent, if that's their family member. I believe the last number we have right now is there's around 300,000 unaccompanied minors that have gone unaccounted for. So after they've been released, the government can't do a proper follow-up. Some of these kids are being human trafficked. They're also being put into labor trafficking. About 2 years ago, actually, I worked on a store in California with illegal marijuana operations where Honduran teens were being trafficked and being forced to work on these marijuana operations. So it's a major, major issue. And for Texas State Troopers here, they feel like there's not really much they could do, right? They encounter these children. They're going to look for those signs of abuse. But after that, they have to turn them over to Border Patrol. And after that, you're really relying on the federal government to do their job on the proper vetting and also proper follow-up on these children. There have been stories where one sponsor address will have multiple unaccompanied minors at their residence. It's a huge, huge area of concern. And for me, like I said, once you look at that 2-year-old video, it's heartbreaking. And for me as a border reporter, I've actually encountered several unaccompanied minor children myself, and many of the times, actually, the kind of contact and the address is literally written on them. And like I said, at the end of the day, there's no way to verify if they're really going to a family member or not.
Yeah, we had a situation here in our town, Gainesville, Georgia, which we do have a large population of immigrants because of the kind of businesses that we have here, legal and illegal. What's interesting is that we had a situation where a young girl ended up missing earlier in the summer, and she was living with a number of men who were supposedly her relatives, but not sure one way or another. She ultimately was found and was safe, but we don't know what happened during the period of time. And I just find that this, to me, as a mother, as a human being, to me, this ought to be the thing that makes people the maddest. I mean, yes, we've got people we should deport that have deportation orders. That seems like a no-brainer to me. Yes, it ought to be a no-brainer that we go after people that are committing violent crimes and get them out of the country. And I'm talking about what Tom Homan has talked about his 3 priorities. But the other priority was these children. And I think as a nation, that should be our number one priority is keeping children safe. And if we can't say whether these 300,000 kids are safe or not, then we're failing, Jorge, that we are.
No, that's right. It's been a total tragedy. And, for as a border reporter, you sometimes forget because for us, sometimes these scenes become normal, unfortunately. And right now, the amount of unaccompanied minors that are coming through here is now becoming a common scene. But it's really important for the American public to continue to see just the reality of the border crisis. And actually, I spoke to the Texas sergeant who filmed that video, and he says, for him, this was important, that the rest of the country needs to see what they're seeing every single day. And he said that he was touched because he's also a father. And at the end of the day, we're all human. And it's sad to say, but we really don't know what that girl has gone through. Mexico is extremely, extremely dangerous. It's a cartel-controlled country. I've interviewed numerous of migrant women and children that have been sexually assaulted on their way. It's heartbreaking. And at the end of the day, here at least the state of Texas is trying to do the best it can to deter, block those crossings, but the smugglers are always adapting. Like I said, here in Maverick County particularly, when you see these amount of children, they're going through the Rio Grande in the middle of the night in the early morning hours, and if they get swept or they drown, I've done plenty of stories on the amount of kids that have drowned here in Maverick County. At the end of the day, smugglers don't care. It's like you said, it's just a product. They know more migrants are coming, so for them, it's they just move on to the next. It's truly sad because here in Maverick County, when those crossings do peak, they actually average a drowning a day here. So it's just really heartbreaking from all sides.
Jorge Ventura of NewsNation, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me on.
Putting the talk in News Talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Alan Sanders is a good friend of mine. We are colleagues and radio hosts together. He's up in Northwest Georgia and does a fantastic job on a podcast and just really looks at things in a really interesting way. And I wanted to have him on the program. Alan, how are you?
Well, hello, Martha, and a happy Thanksgiving to you.
So, this circular firing squad is really interesting because Kamala Harris is out there having a call with supporters either yesterday or today where she says she's still in the fight. She is still trying to raise money, and I think it's really interesting that she thinks that she has a future when she lost so spectacularly.
Well, Martha, there's so much that you've packed in this one little statement. First off, the straw poll that they took literally within a few days after the election, that she's got 40% of the support going into 2028. I'm like, we haven't even had the inauguration, and you've got the left looking at who they want to nominate for the next cycle.
And, of course, she was going to be number one.
Oh.
Of course, she was going to be number one in that one. Yeah.
The thing that I've talked about on my show, and I'm glad you mentioned it, is look at the bullet we dodged. The Biden administration thinks that, and if you look at the last 3.5, now almost 4 years, look at the billions they sent to try to buy friends and allies, and it never works. And that same ideology ran the Harris campaign. She thought she could buy celebrities, she could buy support, she could then buy endorsements, she could buy friends. Well, they were just feeding at the exact same trough that the left has always fed from. An influx of money that they could tap into and ingratiate themselves. That's all it was.
Well, and Morgan brought up exactly the point, is the media buyers and consultants and all those guys, they get paid whether you win or lose. They just get paid because you spend the money and they get a percentage of what you spent. So they don't care. They really don't care if you win or lose. I mean, if you talk, I even know Republican ones that don't care. You know what I mean? It's all about the money. Mm-hmm. That's why they have to do it. Now, did you love...
Well, here's the thing, Martha, and I bet if we dug behind the scenes, I guarantee you people were jacking their rates because the money was going to flow because we had to get Kamala elected, had to beat Orange Man bad. And so those consultants, they were putting in probably 3 and 4 times the hourly rate, and they were getting paid.
The hourly rate, but then also, this is how smart the Trump campaign was. Now, they were so much better run this time than they were the previous 2 times. They had booked their ad time months in advance, okay? And they planned it out. They obviously didn't know what ads they were going to run, but they booked the time. And so there wasn't that much time left for Harris. The Biden campaign was behind in booking that kind of stuff. And then they came along, and Harris, they had to pay top dollar for everything as far as the time went. Even though it was the lowest rate, we're in the radio business, you have to offer the lowest rate. Well, at some point in time, it's a supply and demand kind of thing, right? And so they had to spend more for everything in the 100 days that they were in there. But I did think it was funny when Trump went in to visit Biden. And by the way, I do think that Trump should have done that with Biden when Biden came in. But that's all water under the bridge. He should have been gracious that way, even though he had issues. But they looked so happy that I think Jim Gaffigan was right, that the secret Trump voter was the Biden family.
I mentioned the grin on Biden's face. We may never know 100% how the whole withdrawal went down, but I fully believe when you look at the memo, if we go back, back before Kamala was coronated, there was that memo that came out on the Sunday afternoon, didn't look like Biden's signature, was not on letterhead, that said, I'm withdrawing. No mention of Harris in the withdrawal.
That's right.
2 hours later, he takes to social media, I fully endorse Kamala. I think that was a Biden move to say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to put her in, and if she tanks, then, you took me out, and I'm going to put somebody unqualified to go run. And I think that grin, I couldn't help but to look back and say, he was just grinning at, you took me out, well, I took you guys out.
No, absolutely. I think it was that he saw that Pelosi and Obama wanted this, mini primary or whatever it was that they were calling it. And he was like, okay, I may not have control over being this race anymore, but I do have control over one thing. And if I put her name out there, they're not going to fight me on it. And I think that's absolutely it. I think that he said, I'm going to put the person out there that I think can't win so that I can then say, I could have won. Now, I don't think he would have won either. I think he would have probably... he would have probably lost bigger than she did, frankly. But
100%.
Yeah.
But his ego would not allow him to think that.
No, I think you're absolutely right. So let's get on the biggest issue of the day, which is immigration reform. And you've got the left over there. And by the way, folks, I didn't tell Alan ahead of time what we were going to talk about because I knew he's the kind of guy that he doesn't need to know what we're talking about because you can talk about anything. But the immigration issue is you hear the left out there, the phrase of the week is mass deportation. Okay. And that's the term they're using to make people afraid. But when you listen to Tom Homan has a very different plan he's laying out there. And it makes a lot of sense. First, he says, number one is you get the people who have deportation orders already, which is somewhere between 1.3 and 1.6 million that have already been adjudicated. That makes sense. Following the law, it's not going door to door. Okay, that's people that have deportation orders. Number two, you get the criminal element out. I mean, it was the Hispanics in the apartment complex where the Ibarra brothers lived in Athens that ended up helping police arrest them because they had been terrorizing the people that lived in that apartment complex in addition to the horrible crime of killing Lake and Riley. So there was cooperation that was involved there. So they're going to get the criminal element out next. And then the next thing he's going to focus on is these children that are missing, which I think is 21st century slavery. And I think that's a reasonable thing to put forward that, the lefty pundits are going crazy over, but the average American's going to go, yeah, that makes sense.
I think it's so important that they continue, and I think folks like us in new media need to constantly remind the audience that it is a prioritized, staged approach. And his comment to these mayors and these governors makes 100% sense. Why would you want to save people in your community or, quote, protect them that are known criminals or known national security threats? What in the world are you thinking? We're not going to just start going door to door and grabbing people that haven't done anything wrong. We're going to focus on the problems. Who would be against that? Who would be against moving criminal elements out of your community to keep your citizens safe? But the left has become so virtue signaling on this event. They want to go to everybody. Look what big hearts we have. Look how much better we are that they're willing to say we're going to keep everybody rather than risk losing one person. And next thing you know, we let the government take over. Well, guess what? This is federal law. When you follow the Constitution, there is supremacy here as the federal law trumps state law. You can't stop federal law from being enforced. Otherwise, you are literally rebelling against the government. You want to talk about actual forms of insurrection? You're fighting your own government's law.
Yeah, I do think it's so interesting. If you go back to the 2012 election when Newt Gingrich was in the race, he talked about this issue where he said, honestly, you've got to go after the people that are criminals, but that you also do have to get to a point where you got to look at these cases case by case. That if you have some family that's come here and they've lived here 25 years, I mean, you and I live in Georgia. We know people like this, that they've been here. Mm-hmm. They've been here for 25 years. Other than coming here illegally, they haven't broken the law. In fact, there's a group of people, Alan, it's about 1 million people that have gone to the trouble of getting tax ID numbers so they can file their taxes. I'm like, those people should be legalized immediately. Okay, they went to the trouble to get a tax ID number, and Newt got kind of roundly criticized for that. But he's kind of got the same approach that Tom Homan has. Tom Homan is saying, you've got to go for the big stuff first, and then let's talk about everything else.
You know, something I did on my show a couple of weeks ago, and I don't know if you've done this, go back and pull both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama when they were campaigning and their plan for tackling illegal immigration. If you remember, this was only 10 years ago. Their plan was, if you jump the line, you got to go back and apply. You got to cover your back taxes. You got to pay a fee. But absolutely, we want you here, but you don't get to jump the line. I'd be perfectly fine with the old Democrat plan of 10 years ago.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. And we've talked about that here, that it has become this sort of, I love you use the term virtue signaling, that you're trying to say what a good person you are. I mean, and then now, and we're going to close with this, Alan, which I think is so fun. AOC is in a conundrum because she won her district, but so did Trump. And I thought that was hysterical.
You know, I know the woman who ran against her, a friend of mine, Tina Forty. She became somewhat of an accidental political person because of her social media posts. I think she would have been a far better pick, but, you know, AOC, she lives in a world of hypocrisy herself. I mean, she literally just said the other day, if you kick men out of women's bathrooms, you're going to actually endanger women. I mean, that's the kind of mentality that elected AOC.
Yeah, I think she's interesting. I love it that Tucker Carlson calls her Sandy from the block. Because, you know, her family did what every other family did, is that when they got enough money, they moved to Westchester, and she went to public school in Westchester, and she was known as Sandy back in those days in high school. Mm-hmm. So I love that it's, you know, her parents did what every other parent would do. They moved to where the better schools were. I mean, that is just, she grew up in a very privileged lifestyle, and for some reason, she wants to apologize for it now.
Right. Well, that's the whole modern left right now that we've been dealing with. It's the elitism. We'll have different rules for us, and we expect you to allow us to have the different rules, but we expect everybody else to abide by the rules we set for you.
Alan Sanders, if people want to listen to you, how can they do that?
Well, if you want to grab my daily show and get doses of this every single day, you just need to look for The Alan Sanders Show wherever you find great podcasts.
And he's a great guy. Next time you're over in Gainesville, we've got a brand new studio on the square. You got to come see me.
Absolutely. You and I are way overdue for a lunch as well. So let me just close with this if I can.
Sure.
I know you're up against a break. It is so incumbent that we continue to encourage people to listen to new media and shut off legacy. People like you, me, and others, we're actually trying to fight to get you the truth. Stop listening to legacy media, because all they are, nonstop propaganda and spin.
So is Elon Musk going to buy MSNBC?
You know, I don't know, but I have fun watching him troll the people making the threat that he might.
Yeah, and I love how they said, yeah, we hate billionaires getting into media. Let's see, MSNBC started with Microsoft. I don't know. Maybe it's a problem.
Yeah. Bill Gates, what's his face? Amazon owner Bezos owns the Washington Post. So,
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's only a problem if it's people that you don't like owning media.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here today, Alan.
Thank you so much. And again, happy Thanksgiving to you and everyone in your audience.
It's local radio, and that's why you're listening. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
It is the Martha Zoller Show, and joining me right now is Bill Crane. It's Crane's Corner, but it's been a sad week, Bill. We've lost a couple of kind of greats in Georgia, Joe Tanner and Bruce Thompson. You know, for people that might not know either one of these guys, but Joe Tanner, tell us a little bit about him.
Well, Joe was a giant in the Labor Department for a long period of time and helped kind of modernize the way unemployment benefits and that large surplus the state of Georgia enjoyed in that area of unemployment insurance for many years, as well as professionalized the training centers and job retraining centers in partnership with several state agencies. He also was involved in economic development, and he had a later career as a very successful lobbyist and public affairs professional, and is sort of the father, if you will, of the talents of many of the lobbyists that are under or will be under the Gold Dome during the legislative session today. Many of them worked at one point or another for Mr. Tanner and his firm.
Yeah, and I tell you, and he was also at DNR, right, for a period of time?
Yeah, he was a Georgia Department of Natural Resources commissioner, and he was both improved the housing stock. I'm sorry for leaving that out. The housing stock at our state parks and a lot of the bonded improvements that we've seen across, from down on Jekyll Island all the way back up into Brasstown Valley becoming a state park, being taken over from the Smith-Cull family, substantially invested dozens of billions of dollars, also expanded the staffing.
Well,
and the rangers of those parks, as well as the rangers on Lanier and others that are not federal rangers, and made Georgia a better place to visit.
And so, you think about his loss, and then, of course, we lost Abbott Massey a few months ago, so there's going to be a big gap at the Gold Dome of that kind of experience, that kind of old-school experience that you have in lobbying.
I spoke to the Georgia Public Lobbyists Association I guess it was probably 2 weeks ago. And I think they get really a bum rap. We have a part-time, as we call it, lay legislator, people most of whom have other jobs and businesses they're involved in the rest of the calendar year as well as their families. And they do depend on the expertise of the people from those industries who not only that they regulate, but that help grow Georgia's economy. So it's a cadre of people that are somewhat unsung heroes in terms of helping us have a conservative, well-managed fiscal budget in state, and also having staying a welcoming environment for businesses to come here, thrive, open, expand, or transfer their employees here from other parts of the country.
Well, and I've always looked at lobbyists. I'm sure there are bad lobbyists out there, but
they're
especially in the role in the state, and then even when I worked with Senator Perdue's office, I was, you can't be an expert on everything. Now, what you have to be aware of is that if you're talking to a lobbyist, they've got a point of view, right? And so you got to make sure you balance that point of view, just like you do with anything else, to be sure that you're getting all the information before you make a decision.
Right, and when we're talking about anything major, like let's just take all of the discussion in the last legislative session about hospitals and bed permitting and the whole way that you go about expanding hospitals. There's a big point of view, Grady, Northside, Piedmont, Emory, and a small community hospital point of view. And they're divided as well as the state is in terms of, but there are skilled people on both sides of most of those serious questions, and so they are getting not just one point of view from Big Pharma or one point of view from a concrete company or where they want to build the next highway. And that's something that in the focusing on the negative we so often see in the news media, the good stuff that gets done, the good laws that get written, sort of get left in the sidelines.
So Labor Commissioner Bruce Thompson and Joe Tanner also passed away from pancreatic cancer, but Labor Commissioner Bruce Thompson I met first when he was running for Senate in Cherokee County. I was moderating a panel for their election and got to meet him then. And then throughout his career in the state legislature, I worked with him, especially when I was interim executive director for the Georgia Life Alliance. He was very helpful in our life initiatives that were being put forth. He was a good guy, a straight shooter, and then he became the labor commissioner. And really, before he became ill, did a lot to just reorganize and make more accountable the labor department.
They just upgraded their entire community, all of their computer systems around the state under his watch. I am familiar with him, not as close as you are, but his style reminds me somewhat of our former agriculture commissioner and former U.S. Senate candidate Gary Black, someone who's very effective cobbling together legislators from both parties, rural and urban, getting what the state needs for that agency, in his case the Department of Agriculture, and very effectively delivering on that budget so that the next year it's not an argument over whether or not you fund them again. And I know a lot of folks, including the lieutenant governor and the governor who served with him and who served with him in the state Senate, who only, are not only upset today, but will be at the life celebration and the memorial service this weekend.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of different issues that are out there related to all of these people and the roles that they play. You mentioned Gary Black, Ag Commissioner, which is a nice little segue to our own Kelly Loeffler. Looks like just missed out on being the Ag Secretary in the Trump administration, and they went with a different person for that particular position. I want to make sure it's Brooke something that they had in there. Let me make sure I got it right. Brooke Rollins is who they put in there. And I'm not sure whether Kelly is going to end up getting a role in the Trump administration, nor David Perdue, which everybody thought going in. Doug Collins, it looks like he will get confirmed as Ag Secretary. But, I think that people thought, and I know ambassadors haven't been picked yet, and maybe that would be a position they would go into. But I think it's interesting how that plays out.
Well, I think Senator Loeffler would be a better fit for the U.S. Department of Commerce. But I don't think 100% of the Trump nominees are going to be confirmed. I do think we can still expect some card shuffling of that deck, and some of the people that have been named for one position may land in another. But Ms. Loeffler, in addition to the work she's done on the ground, sort of rebuilding the GOP ranks and helping the Kemp team with turnout for this past election cycle that we just got through, I believe is Donald Trump's top donor in Georgia, and in his top 10 within his campaign, not his super PAC. She's not Elon Musk spending level. But that doesn't get ignored. So if she wants a position in the cabinet, if she wants an ambassadorship of a particular country, I think she will still land well. The David Perdue, I would expect also, I think, again, a good fit for him would be the U.S. Small Business Administration.
Yeah, and it's interesting,
which I don't think
because
they've named an appointee yet.
Yeah, and I found out that, of course, the number one ambassador pick is always the ambassador to the UK, because it's the fanciest, and they do the fanciest stuff. But I found out that kind of like, that you don't know that the president has to pay for his own food at the White House. You have to pay for all the parties you throw if you are the ambassador to the UK.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's well, at least, if you know that going in, you can ask for a posting in a Latin American or Southeast Asian country where it's going to be a whole lot less expensive.
A lot less expensive ones. So I think it's just that's why you see so many wealthy people go into those positions,
I knew the State Department handled a lot of the security and stuff. I just assumed, I guess wrongly, that they also were involved in funding the hospitality, because that is a large part of that job.
Over the summer we went to the UK, and we went to France, and then we went to the UK and got to tour the Foreign Office building. And it's across from 10 Downing Street, and it was one of those days where big things were happening there. So you can't get down 10 Downing Street anymore, kind of the way they've done around the White House, where it's all pedestrian traffic. But from the Foreign Office building, you could actually look across and see 10 Downing Street, that famous kind of view. But the building that the Foreign Office is in was the original East India Company building. So, East India Company was actually... Yeah, I mean, and they were really the colonizers more than anything else.
That's what built the empire, was the export of tea.
But the building was the most opulent thing I have ever seen. I mean, it was just... it was glorious, and it was mainly in the Indian style, because the big jewel in the crown of the East India Company was India. And so it was very interesting to see, and all the history behind it. It was really great.
Well, I'm not anxious for the General Assembly to get underway, but I've been paying attention, as I'm sure you have, with them completing their elections and the new leadership team on the Democratic side, to hear what the governor's state of the state is going to be, and with a $16.5 billion budget in addition to the $1 billion tax refund coming our way, what his top 5 legislative agenda items are going to be.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see, because as Terry England often said, it is not hard to say no when you don't have much money. The problem is saying no when you got as much as we do.
Yeah.
And that's how you end up with a lot of waste, because you still have to think about, are you going to have to fund it in the future? Are you going to have to do all that stuff? So I think it's going to be everybody says, oh, well, this is the lame duck for Brian Kemp. I don't see him being a lame duck.
No, he's got future plans. And I think that, as you just said about the challenge of overspending, they do already take note and have already pointed out state revenue collections for the last 3 months have been declining. Not dropping off a cliff, but dropping.
Well, but we've got plenty of money in our rainy day fund. So
yes, we do. But my point is, you can't spend what you don't have coming in. You got to.
That's right. But if we are frugal, which I think we're going to be, we'll be fine. I wanted to ask you about Senator Ossoff for a minute. Senator Ossoff and Senator Warnock voted against arming, Israel. This past week. There were 3 votes altogether. It was between 18 and 19 senators. So they lost overwhelmingly. Okay. It was 81 senators voted against limiting what was sent to Israel. I was very surprised by that because it really just looks to me like voting with the terrorists. He gave a very eloquent speech.
John Ossoff is Jewish.
He's Jewish. He invoked Ronald Reagan in his speech. He was very eloquent, but he voted against the best interests of Israel, our greatest ally, and the only democratically elected government in that region. And I don't understand why he did.
I think as the Biden administration kind of closes the books out and finishes up its term, they're trying to make some statements. And one that didn't receive a lot of attention but scares the bejesus out of me is that President Biden gave the Ukraine government long-range missiles and the permission to fire them at Russian targets. And one of those could go astray or hit the Kremlin, and it'll be nice knowing you, Martha. We'll all be...
Yeah. I think it scares me, but it also is, I talked about this a couple of times in the show, where if we're going to get involved in these kinds of things, let's call it war, okay? We cannot say to people, you can do this, but you can't do that. You can do this, but you can't do that. And Israel has done a fantastic job of continuing to just do what they have to do, regardless of what machinations the United States is doing. And I think they're making a lot more progress than Ukraine is. Ukraine seems to be
I would agree,
just
but the difference,
stuck.
too, is that we supplied the weapons in both cases. So I do think when we're supplying the armaments, we can, to some extent, say, this is what we're going to continue to do if you follow this doctrine. This is what we're going to continue to do or that we'll do if you don't. Ukraine doesn't have any of those missiles on their own. They can't build them. They can't buy them. So fire them in the wrong places.
I hear you, but I think that if you're not willing to go all out to win this business of having this kind of measured war.
No, I'm agreeing with you on the lack of success there, and I do think we need to be having peace discussions, which I know are at the top of Donald Trump's agenda as soon as he's authorized. I'm sure he's already having back channel with President Putin in Russia now. But it concerns me when literally one of those warheads misplaced could cause World War III.
Absolutely, and he's already saber-rattling on that particular issue, right. Vladimir Putin is. Bill Crane, have a very happy Thanksgiving. I'm thankful for you, and we will talk next week.
Take care, Martha.
To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.